Well, hello everybody and welcome back to the channel. This is David Bianco, back in my regular spot in a bit of a comfy chair after some moving around of the room, getting some more space for records. Not done totally rearranging, but I'm almost there. But in the meantime, I wanted to talk about subs. Now, I like subs in YouTube, subscribers, and you're always welcome to subscribe and to share and to have others sub. But what I'm talking about are subwoofers. You see, it's a topic that I've thought about for a long time as it relates to hi-fi and audio, as opposed to home theater systems. And I want to share some thoughts with you here as we take our next Safe and Sound Texas audio excursion. So recently I got to thinking about subwoofers. Now, the reason I did that is I had seen that Melinda Murphy had put out a video on her channel about 2 new subs that she had gotten for her system. And they were good ones, really good ones. And I thought to myself, gee, you really do have to have a big enough room to really take that on. Subs take a lot of work to tune into the room and to be compatible with your speakers at the crossover levels. And it takes a bit of finesse, so to speak, to get it just right. But I started then to think, well, I don't have a subwoofer. At one time, I had one when I had a more complete 5.1 system in another room, but I gifted that to my daughter and son-in-law for their new home when they put in a system because they had a system with fairly small powered speakers. They were self-powered speakers, and they really needed some bottom end to flush out the bottom, to get that sound that you don't get with those smaller bookshelf speakers. So I don't have one, and I never really have had one in my hi-fi system, and I started to think about that. And I started to do some research, and I recalled that many of the speakers that I have had over time and that I have listened to and pursued all were able to get down near that sweet 20 hertz level. And so I started to check out the specs on a lot of speakers from the good old days, from the 60s, 70s, 80s. And they did. They got down that low. As a matter of fact, the speakers that I have right now, the Polk Audio RTA 11T speakers, get down to 18 hertz. And so I've never felt the need, no pun intended, because I do feel good bass through these speakers. I never seem to need a subwoofer or anything to boost it. I play everything flat. Now, I will say that when I'm playing it at a lower volume, I will use the loudness button on my NAD 3140 amp in order to get a bit of that bottom end up a bit because the volume, it doesn't have enough energy yet to bring that up and give you that feeling. But I've always been fine with it. And again, my room really is not big enough to warrant or need something like a subwoofer. So it is, of course, a matter then of sizing. And it's a matter of where the cutoff is on the speakers that you have. Again, one of the things about subs is they tend to take up some space. So you kind of have to decide where it's going to go. You have to look at positioning. If you only have one, you're going to feed 2 different inputs into it from a right and a left channel in order to be able to capture that signal that goes below whatever the ceiling is of those subwoofers that you might get, and hold that down to give you the lower levels below what the speaker you have can reproduce. So it's important to know where your speakers end, where they go down to, whether it's 48 hertz or 25 hertz or 60 hertz, whatever it is, then you have to size out the sub to be able to start where you want it to and to get down. Most subs have an adjustment on it, so you can calibrate a bit the effect that you want, given your room, given your preference, and what have you. So again, this is also something that in a true home theater, you have the sub content actually segregated out, and you have it in your SACDs or Blu-rays that are 5.1 or better, with the 0.1, of course, being part of the system and the sub. So you have to recognize that when you're doing this for pure audio, it's getting the entire signal, but only able to reproduce part of it down low. So it's a little bit different than it is in the digital world, where that actual subwoofer or low hertz content material can actually get literally segregated out. So how do they sound? I mean, to me, it really is a difficult thing to get right, but you have to have the patience and the ability to have the proper room to house it physically. You have to also be able to tune it in or tweak it in. I have always found that subs that throw downward are better than those that go out to the sides to get the effect that you want. But again, I'm talking about what I've used in home theater. I really haven't had the need to have subwoofers. I mean, my room isn't huge, but my speakers are able to get that low. And with the passive radiator that these pokes have with them, it's not ported as an open port. It's a passive radiator below the woofers that it is able to get there. And it's quite a pleasing sound. And, the thing about it is it's directional. In other words, that lower end is coming right out of that same box that your mids and your highs are coming out of. With a sub, there's the placement issue and where it sounds like it's coming from and or feels like it's coming from. And then there's a lot of issues about the room and the absorption in the room and how it's set up, what kind of materials are in the room. It can offer a pleasing compromise in order to get you down where your speakers don't go. And of course, that's the place for them. Now, one thing I've noticed in looking at the history of speakers and specs is that as time has gone on, 70s, 80s, 90s, and beyond, and subwoofers have entered the home more and more into the hi-fi arena, a lot of speaker systems, in fact, do not get down to 20 hertz. Many of them, including the higher end ones, almost expect that you have a subwoofer to get down into that level. And why not? Think about it from a sales standpoint. Think about it from a marketing standpoint. To be able to have that extra oomph, you've got to buy another speaker or another pair of speakers if you're going to have more than one. So again, there's a little bit of what goes on in the magic of marketing and what goes on in the magic of the technology that drives what happens. And so it isn't necessarily a bad thing, but it is in fact something that has evolved and changed over time. Now, I'll admit, I'm a bit of an old school kind of guy. I'm one who believes that the less there is in the signal, the better. In other words, all the pieces and parts I like to minimize as much as I can. Now, that doesn't mean that a preamp and a separate amp are a bad thing at all. There can be some really large benefits there. And I have NAD power amps that I can connect to my integrated amp to use it separately, or to bridge my 3140 as a mono amp and then have the other amplifier as an amp for the other channel. So I get that, and I have flexibility and capability to do that. But for me, simple is better. Don't have a large room. Really have to manage it. Again, there's something about the fact that I have all that same sound coming out of the same cabinet that really works for me. it really helps manage any issues of imaging because I kind of know it's all coming out of the same box on each side essentially. And it makes it easier to make those judgments. Again, getting a sub definitely can add some depth, and where it's needed, it certainly makes sense. But again, you have to dial it in. You have to get it right for your room. It's all part of the fun of the hobby, and I get it. And I like to mess around and tweak things and do things just as much as the next person. But for me, I grew up on a steady diet of a good solid speaker that does it all. The days of the KLHs and the Advent speakers in the early 70s, the Dynaco amps and preamps to build, Heathkits. So I come from a whole different world, of course, than the way things are today. And I think, as I've said on this channel many times, and if you look at my system, you can see it's not a hugely expensive system really at all, compared to many, many systems. And to a person who has heard my system, they think it sounds very, very solid. Now, do other systems sound better? Absolutely. I've been at other people's houses and heard systems that were amazing. But honestly, I've also been at people's houses and heard systems that were 10, 20 times more expensive than what I have, and I was disappointed in them. I didn't think they sounded that great. Sometimes it was because the cartridge they used I felt was one that really didn't complement the system well. Sometimes the speakers weren't really to my liking. But again, that's not my system. That's not my home. And if the person who owns it enjoys it, that's all that really matters. But to sub or not to sub, that is the question. To me, again, it is, of course, a choice based on your situation, your space, your need. But let me say clearly, there are speakers that can give you the full range of audio that you don't have to spend an arm and a leg on, and you can get them, and they don't take a lot of room in your rooms, that you can get to do the whole wide range without the need for a subwoofer. So it's just something to consider. It's not anything whereby subs are something that I really won't use. I do use them when it comes to home theater because I really feel they have a special place there because there's a channel carved out specifically for that. And we know the impact of that is magnificent in many of the soundtracks that are done correctly. So they definitely have a place. They have a place in audio where needed. For me, I have been lucky enough to find speakers that I think fit the range of my particular requirements, fit the spectrum of sound that I need, and fit the room that I have. And everybody is always on that journey. And how to make it better, that's exactly why we do things like adding subs, because we feel like we just want to get that little bit more that we can get out of the material that's coming out of the source. That is the goal we all have. Analog, digital, doesn't matter. So those are my thoughts on the topic of subwoofers and on speaker design and technology as it has evolved, and some of my thoughts about why one might need one and why one might say, maybe I can get a speaker that covers the range for me, and that's one less piece of equipment that I have to have. So for now, thanks for watching. As always, if you haven't subscribed, please consider doing so by clicking on the bell, and a thumbs up or like is appreciated as well. Comments are always welcome, and I look forward to our next journey as we take another Safe and Sound Texas audio excursion. Take care, everybody.